Here we go. We are back. We are back. Season 2 of the Unnamed Bracketology podcast, episode 2.1. Obviously, whiteboard still with us. This was we tried 6 times to do a podcast. Like, we were going to do a preseason, and then I had an MRI, and then I went to Disney, and the internet didn't work, and we were going to do it yesterday. You had a migraine. I got attacked by a dog today. The world does not want November bracketology. The world is wrong. We are back. We are going to talk about a few topics. Number one, the games we just watched, the Champions Classic. We'll go Kansas, Michigan State first. Mr. Kansas, you can take the lead on this one. What was your biggest takeaway from that first game, aside from the fact that Hunter Dickinson is going to win National Player of the Year?
I really wouldn't be surprised if he does. 28 and 12 today. That was an impressive stat line. Frankly, the rest of the Kansas team didn't do a ton. So it was a more impressive 28 and 12 than I think it otherwise could have been, just because they needed him so bad. But I think my biggest takeaway was that Kansas has some real holes that have developed in their last 3 halves of basketball. That second half against UNC, and then really the whole Michigan State game. I think they tried to go get depth in shooting. They've certainly got depth. Do they have the shooting? That's still a little bit unknown, I think, at this point. I think Zeke Mayo has shown flashes that he could be a real star. But he kind of disappeared for long stretches today against Michigan State. He did end up with 10 rebounds. I think that was important. But you need him to be shooting that 3-ball. And if he's not out there hitting the threes, he's not going to be the guy that you need him to be a national championship contender. So that was my big takeaway, is from a resume standpoint, Kansas has a terrific resume for 3 games into the season.
Yeah.
From a national title contender standpoint, which is really what they're looking for, I don't know that I would put them on that very top tier of national title contenders.
That's fair. You're the Kansas guy. Do you know when Shaq Moore is getting back? And when he does get back, is Diggy Coit ever going to see the floor again?
I think Coit will continue to see the floor, but not in the kinds of minutes that maybe we expected.
Yeah.
Coming out of a really terrific performance, both in the exhibition against Washburn and then also against Howard, looked like a guy who could be a major contributor. But once he got up against UNC and Michigan State, and he's playing some of those tall athletic guys, it just didn't quite work out and transcend his performance to that next level that I think everybody hoped it would. I think Shaq Moore could be potentially coming back against Oakland. I'm wondering if they would have played him tonight if it wasn't his first game being against a quality opponent. Maybe want to ease him into the action a little bit more. But I think Kansas, again, so much depth. I don't think that's the problem. I think right now you're looking at guys like Rylan Griffin and AJ Storr, and we know there's another gear that they can get to. Is the season going to be long enough for them to feel comfortable in that Bill Self system? That's the question I don't know. We all saw with Remy Martin a couple years ago. There were times where it didn't seem to fit so well, and then there were other times where you thought, my gosh, this guy might be the best player on the floor.
Yeah. Now, you were, even before this game, you put the cart ahead of the horse, and you were already looking at Michigan State's, the rest of their schedule. You were assuming a Kansas win. What tournament are they playing in? But that's like their only non-conference game of any note the rest of the way. Resume-wise, how does this game impact Kansas?
Or Michigan State.
Michigan State, yeah. This loss to Kansas, how does that impact Michigan State? Look, it's episode 1. Let me go.
Well, I think for me, looking at Michigan State, I'm identifying a potential issue with the Spartans. And it's not that I don't think they're good enough to make the tournament. I think they will make the tournament. And I think they're certainly good enough to do that in a comfortable seed. But the schedule is not sitting in a friendly way for them. And what I mean by that is, so they take this loss to Kansas, maybe a valiant performance, still a loss.
Yeah.
And then they go into Maui, and they look at that schedule. That first game, they get Colorado. If there's one opponent in Maui that's not going to help your resume at all, it's beating Colorado on a neutral court. So if they win that, they're probably playing UConn in the semis. I'm guessing UConn probably beats Michigan State. So then if they do that, and they lose that semifinal game, then they go into the 5th place game, which is at that point.
What, the North Carolina...
Or the 3rd place game.
Yeah, the 3rd place game.
But the 3rd place game would
North
be...
Carolina, Iowa State... Was Iowa State, Purdue, or something like
Auburn.
that? Auburn.
So they're looking at probably Iowa State, Auburn, or UNC
Oh,
in that third place game. I'd venture to say that there's a decent chance Michigan State could go
yeah.
1-2 in
With a
Maui,
win over Colorado.
and they're looking at a non-conference season where they didn't pick up a single quality win in
Yeah.
the whole non-conference season. And then where I think it gets to be a little bit of trouble is if you look at their Big Ten schedule, it's a whole bunch of teams that aren't going to be elite wins for you if you win,
Well, that's just the Big Ten.
but they're hard. Like,
Yeah.
these games are going to be difficult. And
Yeah.
if you're a bubble quality team, you're probably losing a lot of those games. And I think Michigan State, certainly a good enough team to be, I have them as a preseason 6 seed. I still think they'll probably end up somewhere around there. But the path to being a bubble team throughout the year is certainly there just because it doesn't look like they're going to get anything out of their non-conference. And if they do, it'll be a complete resume changer.
And they've been pretty good about finding that path to a bubble team the last few years. The other game, Duke, Kentucky. I mean, I'll go quick. I mean, Kentucky was tough. This is not Kentucky of yore. Mark Pope Kentucky is fun. They're tough. They're resilient. Duke is insanely talented, but there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, clearly down the stretch, they were just like, here, Cooper, see what you can do. And then he just dribbled the ball off his foot twice. But man, once they figure out how to use their length to their advantage, like I think Ken Palm wise, they're number one in the nation in average length. You just watch the game; they're long as hell, but their communication, and they're starting three freshmen. Like this is going to happen. This is the thing John Calipari would preach every year at Kentucky. It's like at the Champions Classic, it's like, well, these guys are going to grow, whatever, but there were a lot of defensive switches that just didn't happen for Duke. A lot of miscommunications. You were saying the whole night, like they should just be running back cuts and destroy this defense. And then they finally did at the end. Like they saved it for when it mattered the most and got the victory out of it. But I thought both teams looked really good. That was easily the better of the two games. Um, Not that I think that Kentucky or Duke is necessarily better than Kansas, but I think they were the two more impressive teams of this night.
Yeah, I completely agree. I still think coming out of this, even though Duke lost, I still think they're the top team coming out of this Champions Classic in my book, as far as who I'm looking forward to as a national championship contender down the
Oh, I
road.
thought you meant seed wise. I was like, I thought we were in agreement that Kansas was.
We'll get to the seeds in a
All
little
right. So number two, since this is our first episode, and we've got two new data points on the resume sheets, adding the Torvik efficiency ratings and WAB wins above bubble. Graham, WTF is WAB? I have never looked at it before because I try not to cloud my brain with things that I assume the committee isn't looking at. But conceptually, when I'm not doing basketball, I'm doing baseball. I love wins above replacement. I think WAR is a great. WAB is a stupid acronym. We're going to be talking about Wascally Wabbits all season instead of WAR, which is a great acronym. But how are you planning on using wins above bubble? I'm probably only going to say WAB like two more times the rest of the year. I hate it, but go
I
ahead.
think I'm going to look at it very similarly to KPI and strength of record as far as my analysis goes. I think I'll probably put a little bit more emphasis on it when it comes to the at-large pool.
Sure.
And that's really, I don't know if that's what the committee's going to do. This is just a guess of mine. But I think when you have a tool, wins above bubble, that really is supposed to measure how would a bubble team do against this schedule, I think they're probably going to give that a little extra emphasis just because that's the actual purpose of that entire tool. And Virginia, for example, did very well last year in wins above bubble because they played a bunch of fairly tough games and they came out on top of most of those. It was when they lost, they were getting blown out. But as far as what did they actually accomplish
Yeah.
compared to what most bubble teams would have done, they did a very good job against that sort of schedule. So I think the committee might do something like that, and especially right when we get around that bubble, give a little bit more emphasis to this tool.
Do you think it's going to change much of how? Because as you said, it's similar to KPI SOR. We're really just getting a third metric on both sides, which I appreciate because any chance to put less emphasis on BPI is a win for the world. But do you think that it's going to balance out in such a way, or is it just going to show that BPI is more of an outlier and we'll focus more on these other metrics?
In a good way, I think it's going to show BPI as a little bit more of an outlier, and I think that's a great thing for the selection committee. I still think they're going to be able to do what they've kind of always wanted to do. They might look at BPI and be like, we think this team's really good, so
They're good at altitude.
look at their BPI, you know? They can kind of do whatever they want to do,
Yeah.
and so I think there are going to be times that you look for that one data point that confirms what you already believe in your head. I think the committee can still continue to do that. But I do think now we're going to see more of an emphasis on Torvik from the efficiency side as opposed to BPI. If I had a guess,
Yeah.
BPI will be the single least used metric on that team sheet.
Please. Do you think it's going to help? Like, if it had been in effect last year, Indiana State probably gets in. Does wins above bubble help those mid-majors more so than it will, the 12th best team from the ACC or the Big Ten or whatever?
I think it will. I do. And I think it's a recognition for the committee that given your limited opportunities, you did something with it. And I think quality wins is very important, but there's also just winning consistently and not in gimme games. I don't think it's going to help the teams that are just playing an only quad 4 schedule.
Yeah.
It's going to help the teams that are getting some of those quad 3s that don't really show up the way that you'd expect them to. But if you're going 7-0, 10-0 in quad 3, that's impressive. It might not seem like it because you should win all those games, but to not drop one, I think that's the sort of team that could really get a benefit here.
Yeah. I mean, I've not really paid any attention to wins above bubble before this season, but like conceptually, I feel like it's what we've always tried to do as bracketologists is just insinuate or imply, whatever word I'm looking for, whether they were better than what other bubble teams would have done with the opportunities they were given. So hopefully, once we dig into the data, which I'm not even going to look at it still until a month into the season, but I guess North Florida was like number one before today in wins above bubble. But I think it's going to help those mid majors, which it probably won't because it never does. Every time we hope that it's going to help the mid majors, it doesn't. They find some way to keep those teams out. But I'm interested to see just if we can get BPI a little bit out of the picture. All right, title contenders and number one seeds. This was your pitched idea. What was it? Who was your title pick before the season, and has that changed?
Yeah, so before the season, my final 4 picks were UConn, Duke, Kansas, and Baylor, and that's really how I felt about them. I felt if you're going to have a national champion, it's going to be in that order of likelihood. And I don't know that it's really changed a lot, other than I'm starting to doubt Baylor a little bit more, and the early returns on Kansas aren't quite as good as I thought they would be. Duke has looked about like I expected, even though they lost that Kentucky game. UConn, it's kind of a little too hard to judge because they haven't really played anybody. But I would even say for them, they've looked very good in the games they have played. Solo balls looked terrific. Raids looked very good. So I think for me, the UConn national title pick, and that's who I ultimately went with. I think, between them and Duke, I think it was a really tough call for me. But I just look at UConn and think about Danny Hurley. And if it's anywhere close, I'm going to go with Danny Hurley. And I think they have not just talent, I think they have a little bit more talented team than a lot of people have kind of given them. There's been a lot of talk about the drop in talent this year, and I don't think it's quite as dramatic as a lot of people are selling it.
2 top 7 picks, but they also got Liam McNeely. And yeah, I think that was my pick before the season just because I feel like if you win back-to-back titles, you have to prove that you're not the favorite before I'm going to assume you're not the favorite. And like you said, they haven't played anybody yet, so nothing to take away from it really. But the guy that they're adding that they needed to be that star, Liam McNeely, double doubles in each of the first 2 games. He's done what he needs to do against the schedule that's been provided to him. But we're gonna have to wait another 2 weeks before we can really make any sort of legitimate judgment calls on UConn, but that's still going to be my pick. I have a hard time going away from them. So, number 1 seeds right now, 8, 9, 10 days into the season. What do you got? Has it changed? I guess Auburn joined the conversation.
It's changed a fair amount compared to what I had preseason.
All right. So, what are your ones in order? And we'll go to your top 6.
All right. So before the season, my number 1 seeds in order were Kansas, UConn, Duke, and then Alabama.
Okay.
Again, a little bit different than who I thought the title contenders were in order. And that has changed a bit because I still have Kansas number one overall, and I don't think it's necessarily because they've looked really impressive at times. It's just they've got wins over North Carolina and Michigan State 2 games into the season. They're the number one team, so even if you don't think they've looked great, they're still the number one team in the country. So I think they're number one overall for me. Behind them, I think it's Auburn, based on really not just the terrific performance against Houston, but also Vermont. That was absolutely dominating. A terrific game by Auburn. So they've gone from a 2 seed for me to 2 overall, followed by Gonzaga. That 101-63 victory over Baylor just really caught my attention, even if Arizona State played them a little bit closer in the kennel after that. And then I think the final team now is UConn. I would have had Duke up as my 2 overall if they had beaten Kentucky, but I think because of that, I'm dropping Duke down and I'm actually moving UNC. I think despite being 1-1, I like them right outside that 1 seed contender spot just for the time being, based on how close they kept it at Kansas. And I also think that you have to look at Alabama as, despite a team that hasn't really done anything yet, they're winning. The number 2 team in the country, so I think they're right around there as well.
Yeah, they've been disappointed. I also have them as my second team out from the 1 seed line. Is that how we would word that? Number 6 overall. We're going to find out a lot about Alabama in the next few weeks. I think they play at least 6 of their next 7 games against, I believe, ranked opponents. And it's possible the 7th game will also be against a ranked opponent because they play in that Players Era Festival where they might get Texas A&M or Creighton. We'll see how that shakes out. But yeah, they haven't looked great thus far. So heading into the season, I tried to take, not do it opinionated at all. I did it using Ken Palm, Torvik, Haslametrics, Norlander's top 101, the AP poll, and maybe there was a 6th data point. I just basically averaged them. Why work harder when you can work smarter? And Houston was the number 1 overall at the time. Obviously, that has changed, taking a neutral loss to Auburn in Houston. I hate those games so much. Just call them road games. But so they were my 1 before the season. I had Kansas, UConn, and Bama was 4 overall based on those averages. And I think the way Alabama has performed, I think they deserve to drop. Houston had that loss. So we have the same 4. I just have UConn at 2 instead of 4 because, as I was saying, they got to prove they don't deserve it before I'm going to drop them from that. And then Duke and Alabama 5 and 6. So we're basically on the same. Or you said North Carolina. You're crazy. You just got scared by that comeback from that 20-point deficit against Kansas.
I do think Duke will ultimately get into the 1 line again at some point. Just for right now, they're really basically have lost their only game that they were supposed to potentially win, and it was a neutral site game against Kentucky, whereas North Carolina played overall number 1 at their own arena. So that's the slight differentiator to me at this point.
Duke's wins above bubble ratio is probably not great. Biggest surprise teams from the first week and a half. We'll do 1 good and 1 bad. You go first on your good.
So preseason, I had Tennessee as a 4 seed.
Okay.
I think they're looking more like a 2 or a 3 seed to me at this point. Just really impressive offensive and defensive efficiency. They won at Louisville 77-55, just a 67 possession game. So really impressive performance there. I would say Tennessee for me is a team that I thought was going to be pretty good. They might be great, and I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, they were. I don't know if that said more about Louisville. They're every bit as bad as they were the last 2 years, or if that was a Tennessee thing. Obviously, that's what you get when you only have 2 data points early in the season. My good surprise is New Mexico. And again, that could say more about UCLA that they were able to win that game. But New Mexico won a game against a quality opponent away from home. That's what we asked them to do for 4 months last year. They've already done it. 2 games into the season. Donovan Dent looks like a god. I think he had 27 and 9 tonight against A&M Corpus Christi. Take from that what you will, but he was phenomenal against UCLA. Coming into the season, again, from not my opinion, I assume the Mountain West is going to be a multi-bid league. But what all those rankings said is that there were no top 45 teams in the Mountain West this year, which is crazy, but already New Mexico has a piece of gold. That's what I was going to say earlier about wins above bubble. It's just metrically telling us what Rocco's been trying to tell us for years. Bad surprise for me, and it's a 3-0 team, so this might be a little bit weird, but you did agree with me when I mentioned this. It's Marquette. When you play the Marquette Challenge and you struggle against both George Mason and Central Michigan at home, I have some concerns. I know they lost Tyler Kolek, very good player, first team All American, but they were still a very old team. Like they're starting 5 juniors and seniors. All those guys have been in the program. They should not be struggling with Mason and Central Michigan. I think that was a bit of an eye opener. Again, 3-0. They actually moved up 3 spots in the AP poll, which tells you all you need to know about the AP poll ever, especially early in the season. But I have not been impressed with Marquette. You're also on a Big East team as your big surprise.
Yeah, so preseason, I actually didn't put Villanova in my preseason projected bracket.
They were, I want to say, an 8 seed with the metrics way that I went with
I
it.
think they were 20 in Ken Palm, if
Yeah.
I remember correctly. So it was really, that was more of a pick for me, saying, I know what the efficiency metrics say, I know what the sports books say. I don't really care. I just think they're coached by Kyle Neptune, and I don't care if they've got Dixon. Like, look at what's likely to happen to this team. And honestly, it's been even worse than I expected. I thought they might have a loss to St. Joe's by now. I didn't expect they'd have a loss to St. Joe's and a 10-point home loss to Columbia. I thought they were probably going to be a bubble team that misses the field. They might not even be a bubble team at this rate. Just really poor performances, especially against Columbia. That actually rated on Bart Torvik as a 22.4 game score.
What does that mean?
Which means if you take 100 teams from like the 100th percentile of teams, they rated as like the 22nd out of 100 teams that you would expect to perform that well. So basically what you're looking for is
like bottom 80 nationally.
Yeah, they performed like you'd expect like a team from the Northeast Conference to perform against Columbia. That's about what they did, which Villanova shouldn't be doing. So to put it in terms that maybe make some sense, really, really poor performance. They're performing like literally one of the quarter worst teams in the country of all the teams in the country.
So pathetic. And what's crazy is, what was it, the 20, no, not 2013, 14, 2012, 13, one of those years, they lost by 19 at home to Columbia. Like, this has happened before, and it was after the year they went like 13 and 20. Like, maybe that was the kick in the pants that they needed 10 years ago, but they just look dead now. Man.
I can't see him surviving the season. I just can't.
Yeah, I don't even know if he'll make it to the end of the season at this point. Might have a Bo Ryan mid-December retirement on our hands here. So biggest conference takeaways. There was a different wording for that, but I abridged it. Which conference is most concerning based on what we've seen thus far? And based on our 2 bad surprises, go ahead. This was your idea. You can have the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, I think the low-hanging fruit is, of course, the Big East. Yeah. We've already talked about Villanova. We've talked about Marquette, but it's throughout the entire conference. Pretty much every team in the league is looking worse than we expected to. I think you could maybe argue DePaul's doing a little bit better, but they needed a miracle to even get their win over Southern Indiana, right? So this is a really, really shocking early beginning of the season for the Big East. Their record's actually better than you'd expect based on the performances.
Like 3 or 4 losses, but they were terrible losses.
And they keep pulling out close games against really bad competition. I just think almost to a T, everybody's underperforming. They're looking more like the Big West than the Big East. And I mean, that's truly from a metric standpoint. If you were to look at Torvik, how it's rating these games, that's basically what they're looking like. And you can really go across everybody. Providence beats Central Connecticut State by 4, a game they could have easily lost. Xavier gave up 80 points to the artist formerly known as IUPUI. Just not
IU Indianapolis.
IU Indy, yeah. So not a strong performance at all for the Big East. And last year, there was a lot of anger out of Big East fans because they said the Big 12 kept tricking the computers by easily beating bad competition. The Big East is playing bad competition, and they are not easily beating them. So, is it easy to beat bad competition? It should be if you're as good as you think you are. But the Big East is really, really struggling. And initially, I thought they were going to get maybe 5 or 6 bids. Yeah. If they come back with 4, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. So, in addition to all you said, Butler lost to Austin Peay. Seton Hall lost to Fordham. Yikes. And Creighton needed all 49 of Ryan Kalkbrenner's points to survive against University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, UTRGV. There it is. My pick for this is the ACC. My pick is the Big East, but we got to diversify a little bit. But right, so the ACC has been a 5-bid league each of the last 3 years, and their solution was to add SMU, Cal, and Stanford. Not good. And Georgia Tech got smoked at home by North Florida. Boston College lost to VCU. Louisville got destroyed by Tennessee, as we mentioned. North Carolina played okay, but lost to Kansas. Wake Forest is not as good as we thought they might be. Louisville certainly isn't. Virginia kind of looks like garbage. Like they only have two top 25 teams. Whether you're looking at AP poll, Ken Palm, whatever, it's Duke and North Carolina, and they each already have one loss. Could this 18-team league be a 3-bid league? Like, how are you gonna do that? Like, there are going to be no quality wins to be found in the ACC yet again outside of Duke and North Carolina. I mean, Clemson's okay, Miami's okay, Wake Forest might be okay, but they haven't been impressive thus far. I thought they were going to be clearly the third best team, and they have not been.
Yeah, I had Miami, Clemson both fairly comfortably into my preseason bracket. And then I had Pitt sneaking in as the
Yeah,
last at-large team.
They've been like the only impressive thing about the
And
ACC
that's what I was going
so
to say. I
far.
think Pitt has been a little bit more impressive than some people were expecting to see. On the other hand, yeah, to almost again very similar to the Big East, like almost to a team looking worse than you would expect. I think you mentioned Virginia. I think both the Virginia schools are looking rough. I'd be
Yeah.
surprised if either of them grabs a bid. It's actually kind of funny. I had Virginia 21st in my preseason rankings, and then Tony Bennett announced he was
Yeah.
retiring, and I dropped them out of the field entirely.
Yep.
I just thought that was a big enough change that it's going to cost them. Similar to Kyle Neptune, coaching matters a lot in college basketball. And, you can handpick your successor as much as you want, but if they're not the original guy, that can be a huge drop off. And I think the ACC is experiencing that in many ways.
Syracuse, was it Cornell played today? Won by 2. Like,
And barely beat Lemoyne, too.
just across the board, disappointing. Yeah, let's watch Connecticut go beat Lemoyne by 60 tomorrow and really stick it to Syracuse. All right, well, that is our list. We actually went longer than I expected. It is now midnight on the East Coast, but we got to figure out what our cadence is going to be. Once a week, twice a week, every day. It's not going to be every day. But we'll be back eventually with more bracketology goodness. Until then, take care.